II is the sequel to Gladiator. This one once again directed by Ridley Scott, and this one starring Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, Joseph Quinn, Pedro Pascal, Connie Nielsen, among others as well, but those are the biggest names I can remember. This movie focuses on Lucas, the son of Lucilla from the first Gladiator. You know, after the events that happened in the first Gladiator, he was sent off into hiding by his mother, so, you know, the people who wanted the throne wouldn't come after him. Since then, he's become this soldier, he's married, but something goes on when the Roman army attacks his squadron, his wife is killed, he gets sold into slavery to become a gladiator. He's bought by Denzel Washington's character, who promises to give him the chance to exact revenge on the general of the army that murdered his wife, who's played by Pedro Pascal. So in turn, Denzel Washington can creep his way up the hierarchy in the Roman Empire. The first Gladiator is one of the greatest movies ever made. I think that's the general consensus among people right there. I mean, Russell Crowe's performance as Maximus made him one of the greatest characters of all time. Just, that movie is phenomenal. I mean, if I had a gun to my head and you had to tell me to pick the best Ridley Scott movie ever, I would pick Gladiator, and I think I would live through the situation. And here we are 24 years later, and we have a new Gladiator movie, and this was a movie that I was kind of surprised was made. I never really thought that Gladiator needed a sequel. I didn't think it was a story that needed to be continued. It was great as a standalone movie. But I'll say this much, early on the movie was getting some very strong reviews, strong positive word of mouth, so it made me think, okay, maybe this was a movie that was worth making, maybe there was more of a story to be told, maybe this could be a real legacy sequel right here. So right out the gate, let me tell you what's great about this movie. Okay, the gladiator scenes, the battles in the arena, the battles in the Coliseum, they're fucking awesome. I mean, once again, they're bloody, they're violent, they are action-packed, they are intense. And there are undeniably some kill shots, some battle moments that just have you on the edge of your seat that make you go, oh, fuck, that looked brutal. But in that very entertaining and satisfying way, it made you feel like we are seeing gladiators just on full-out war with each other in a fight to the death, and it was epic. And hell, what I like this movie also did is I feel like it expanded more on the history with the Colosseum. In this one, we see more naval battles in the movie, which I thought was cool. Because I legitimately did not know that the Colosseum actually did have, like, battles with, you know, ships and with water in the middle of the arena. I thought that was really cool. That's something I didn't know. Went home, did a little research. Apparently that was true. I think that's awesome. Yeah, cast-wise across the board, I thought everybody here did a really good job. Denzel Washington in particular, I thought was by far the best character in this movie. He gave easily the best performance. Some people are saying he might be up for an Oscar. It wouldn't shock me if he got nominated. Because what I initially really liked about his character is he's very eloquent. You know, you totally feel like he's on Paul Mescal's side. You know, he wants to get him that revenge. You feel like he wants to creep up that ladder because he feels he can do a better job than the people in the Empire who are currently running shit right now. Touch more on his character as we go along, but that is my initial reaction towards Denzel Washington's character. And Denzel Washington's performance in general was just all in all really good. Getting to some of the flaws I have with this movie, if it sounded earlier when I summed up the plot of this movie that it sounds familiar, it sounds repetitive, well, that's because it is. I mean, it's called Gladiator II, but it might as well have been just a remake to Gladiator, because that's kind of what it feels like. It kind of feels like a retelling of the first story. I mean, you have this soldier, he has this wife, his wife is murdered by someone high up in the Roman Empire, he gets sold into slavery, he has to become a gladiator, he has to fight his way through these gladiator tournaments to get to the revenge point that he wants to get to. If you feel like you've seen that before, you have. And if you're like me and you watched the first Gladiator the night before you went to see Gladiator II, it really feels redundant. So yeah, there's just unfortunately not a whole lot of originality here. It doesn't really feel like a sequel that was really expanding on this world, expanding on these characters. It just kind of felt like, you know, the first story worked in its way that it did, so let's just do it again, pretty much line for line. And frankly, what's really even disappointing about that, it's like the characters in this one, they're just never gonna feel as memorable as what we got in that first Gladiator movie. I mean, Paul Mescal is in this movie, and he does a fine job. I mean, I know he's been one of those rising stars as of recent, but this is nothing I'm gonna remember him for in the long haul. I mean, credit to the guy, he got ripped for this role, he really trained to be a great gladiator. I give him credit for that, he committed to this role. The problem is, the movie's trying so hard to make him the new Maximus, and he's just not that. So yeah, if you're going to this movie expecting him to be the new Russell Crowe and give a Russell Crowe-esque kind of performance, that is not here. I mean, his quest for revenge and his ability to galvanize the gladiators that he was, fighting alongside and fighting against in some moments. That real charisma that Russell Crowe had that made him such an iconic character, Paul Mescal just doesn't have that here. There are moments that they're clearly actively trying to make it that it's supposed to be that. Like, there were scenes that I know they were aiming to give you chills and get you on the edge of your seat and make you feel like, fuck yeah, let's go. But it never got me to that level. Certainly not on the level as the first Gladiator did. And hell, when it comes to the villain aspect in this movie, okay, Pedro Pascal, who's the one that Paul Mescal is going after because that's the one who killed his wife, he's the general of the Roman army, he was a pretty forgettable character. He just doesn't really do much in this movie. He's certainly not Commodus, if that's what you were wondering. And again, Joaquin Phoenix's performance as Commodus, I would argue, is equally as iconic as Russell Crowe as Maximus, because Commodus is such a great villain. And that guy was slimy, he was vile, he was cruel, he was evil, he was disgusting, he was just a despicable human being. Pedro Pascal is simply the general of the army, and he didn't really have anything that really stood out to him as a villain or as an antagonist of any sort. Like, he never really felt like a villain. It's just like, he was a general for the army. Paul Mescal's squadron, which consisted of his wife, were attacking his army. He ordered the hit on his wife, sure, but, as far as it looks, I was like, it was a battle, it was a war. In this case, though, you feel like Paul Mescal's wife isn't really all that innocent, and Pedro Pascal doesn't seem all that guilty of a man. So as a result, it's a revenge quest that I guess I have to root for because Paul Mescal is the hero of the story, but it doesn't have the same level of impact that the first Gladiator did. Also, yeah, the twin emperors in this movie, one of whom is played by Joseph Quinn, the other one is the actor I can't remember, but these two, again, I feel like they're trying to be like Commodus, like these ruthless, tyrannical rulers. But, they were so over the top. And the movie's trying to make them so just unhinged and ruthless and evil and just batshit, but honestly, I found them just annoying and frankly kind of stupid. Like, you can see why Denzel Washington is trying to, pit these two against each other and how he's trying to, usurp his way up to power with the two of them, because it seems pretty easy to do so. These guys are kind of fucking idiots. So yeah, certainly are in no way the iconic villains that Commodus was. At the same time, it just leaves you sitting there wondering, how did the two of you get to power? Was this just daddy's money? Did you know a guy? What was it? And yeah, honestly, the execution of the storytelling is also what really throws me off, because there are certain points with certain characters that go on that really just didn't make sense because they kind of just come out of nowhere. Like Paul Mescal, you kind of see him turn into this great leader, and he kind of thinks more about Maximus's cause and how that's maybe something he should support, when in the beginning, that's something he didn't really care about entirely. So at what point in the movie does he just flip his switch like that? Because it kind of just feels like on a dime, he just decides to abandon what he was going for, or at least somewhat abandon what he was going for, and then pursue something entirely different. Denzel Washington, getting back to his character, is kind of in the same boat. He's using Paul Mescal to get to a certain point for himself, and at first you feel like there's a partnership there, there's a camaraderie there, and then as time goes on, Denzel Washington kind of flips on a dime, and he becomes someone you're supposed to root against. And I feel like we're missing something somewhere in this movie that would have made more sense to how these characters just went in the direction that they did, that ultimately leads to what the climax of this movie becomes. So yeah, it feels like in typical Ridley Scott fashion, there is a 4-hour cut of this movie out there somewhere that probably delves more into the characterization for certain characters in this movie, but this is the final cut that we got, and it's just missing. The character development in the first Gladiator, I know I'm comparing it to the first Gladiator a lot, but look, I can't help it. It's a sequel to Gladiator, and it's one of the greatest movies ever made. How can I not? But the character development in that first Gladiator was perfect. You completely see, Maximus become this great hero and this leader, and you're rooting for him in so many different ways to get the revenge that he wants, not just for himself, but because of the impact it will have. And even with Commodus, as evil and as terrible a villain as he was, terrible as a villain person, you know what I meant. He was a great villain because of how terrible he was. But you also understood him. You saw a really damaged, broken character that just went down the wrong path, got the wrong idea of some things, and just did some really shitty things because of it and became what he was, and it made sense. The development in this movie just doesn't really exist for me, and as a result, it just makes the characters just just kind of there. Just there for the sake of the story. That just feels very redundant. So all in all, Gladiator 2, it's a fine movie that feels very familiar. The gladiator scenes, the action scenes that are in this movie, those are fucking awesome. Those were a ton of fun. They are intense. They have you on the edge of your seat. That's something that this movie still very much has in it, and that's great. The people that were in this movie did clock into work. They gave good performances. Denzel Washington in particular, I thought was the best character. But that being said, it's a story that feels way too familiar. It's one we've seen before, 24 years ago. As far as the rest of the cast, it's a pretty star-studded cast when you look at it. I mean, no one else really stands out in a way that I would appreciate. Paul Mescal in particular, I mean, gives a fine performance, but his character, Lucas, he's not going to be very memorable for me. But hell, Connie Nielsen's in this movie. Does she really do much? Not that I really care to talk about. And in the end, this is the type of sequel that doesn't really feel like a sequel. It feels like a remake to something that certainly did not need a remake. So yeah, I really wanted to love this movie. I really wanted it to be one of those movies of the year. But it just feels like another one of those sequels that was just unnecessary. So that's all I'm gonna say, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video, and as always, definitely leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.